Doesn't look too entertained at the moment. He's ready to get some chips in his hand. He's not got a huge stack. He's got the king 10 off, gonna be coming in. Oh, he just ran into a real hand from Mr. Ivan.
Wow, Ivan just calls.
Playing a koi.
Kind of surprised when you're Ivan, you get paid.
Yeah.
Playing with a couple of suited cards. Looks like he wants to get involved as well.
Yeah, his hand just plays well. He's got no reason to squeeze. Like a hand like King Jack off would be a good hand to squeeze. 6 deuce suited.
So we have 34 left in the Party Poker 25K No Limit Hold'em Super High Roller event in Sochi, and Phil Ivey opens it up in the hijack with slightly more than a min raise holding King 10 off. This is a standard open as all Broadway combos are opening with the ante in play at 40 big blinds. The action folds around to Ivan Liao in the small blind, and he decides to simply flat with pocket queens. Ivan is known to be quite aggressive, so this clearly is an attempt to trap. However, we see that at this effective stack depth, the solver prefers raising 100% of the time with queens, and it seems that this is the type of holding that does not want to play out of position and potentially multi-way. But given the call, we're going to give Ivan a low frequency of traps with some of these stronger holdings for purposes of this sim. And finally, Ben Heath also comes along in the big blind with 6 deuce suited, which we see is also standard since given Ivan's call, the big blind is getting a great price to continue, where all suited combos are calling, as is almost 64% of the range overall.
It's his hand, he can feel pretty good about it. And the... Whoa, both have a... Oh man,
yeah.
Wow. Phil got a pretty special flop for the King 10 off. And Ivan can't like what's going on here, although he does have the Queen of Spades.
The flop comes ace, 10, deuce, all spades. The blinds check to Ivy, and he continues with a third pot bet. So on this particular flop, the pre-flop aggressor has a range advantage as evidenced by the respective EVs of the players. With the ante, the hijack opener should have a number of flushes, all of the sets, most 2 pairs, and the strongest top pairs, and so the solver is checking both blinds nearly 100% of the time out of position. However, despite Ivy's range advantage, we see that the solver is checking nearly 50% of his range in this spot. This is likely a function of the ace-high monotone board. Right, if we take a look at some representative flops in a different scenario, a cutoff versus big blind single raise pot in a no ante game, and sort by the boards with highest checking frequency, we see that most of these boards are either ace-high and or monotone, and this pattern will be present to some degree in many other scenarios as well. These boards are unique because both players should have a number of flushes and top pairs in their range, which severely diminishes the equity of other strong holdings such as higher pocket pairs, and at the same time there's less need for protection against turn and river runouts. Additionally, the pre-flop caller will have fewer marginal hands that can continue on a board like this against Hero's value range, especially when facing larger bets. The net result of these factors will often be the suppression of aggression across the range, both in terms of frequency of betting and bet sizing. That being said, although the solver is checking most of his second pairs here, we do see that the solver is betting Phil's specific holding nearly 75% of the time. So why is this? Well, figuring out a baseline strategy for medium strength hands like this seems to be one of the most difficult aspects of understanding and implementing GTO. On most flops, in the pre-flop aggressor's shoes, the solver will often utilize what I refer to as a semi-merged strategy. That is, the solver will typically bet with highest frequency with the top and bottom of its range, but it will also mix in, to a lesser degree, C-bets with the middle portion of the range as well. These are combos that are not typically inclined to grow a large pot because as more and more money begins to get piled in, the likelihood of these middling hands being ahead of villain's range becomes increasingly diminished. However, if Hero chooses to always check call these medium strength hands, it will make it easier for villain to define and play against Hero's range. For example, if Hero always uses a polarized betting strategy and he bets on the flop and then a middle or bottom card pairs on the turn, the villain would know that it's impossible for the hero to have trips. Or if the same hero checks the flop and then the turn is blank, villain would be able to punish Hero knowing his range is likely capped. So to avoid this, how do we implement a semi-merge strategy in practice without going overboard? Well, there's likely no perfect solution for this since the solver's method of range construction is extremely complex and can shift dramatically depending on the specific scenario and slight differences in the player's ranges. That being said, having a systematic approach that we can use as a baseline to roughly mimic the solver's semi-merging strategy may be helpful. A few months back, I posted a series of videos where I previewed the GTO check blueprint, which is a principle-based approach to analyzing hands in a way that's designed to mirror solver play. I'm not going to get into all the details again, but basically the GTO check blueprint is a tri-level system which begins at the highest level of abstraction and only moves down to the more granular levels when doing so will win significant EV. So using this hand as an example, from a macro perspective, we know that Phil is in position and he has a range advantage, which should increase his aggression overall. But on the other hand, this board texture is one where he should be doing a significant amount of checking as we just discussed. So some mix of betting and checking here with Phil's overall range is warranted. As such, the next step is to move on to the Meso Analysis, where we analyze the characteristics of Hero's hand class. Here, Phil is holding second pair, which is a medium strength hand that likely has decent equity against the blind's ranges, and at the same time could also use protection, which incentivizes betting. But on the other hand, second pair generally does not want to create a huge pot on such a dangerous board. The net result of these factors is that we should probably be mostly checking this hand class, but to mimic GTO, we'll need to mix in some bets for optimal balance. Accordingly, we proceed down to the final level, the microanalysis, where we analyze specific equity-altering characteristics to determine which specific combos within the class should bet and which should be checked. There are three broad categories of hand attributes that we consider in the microanalysis: incremental equity, blockers, and unblockers. For purposes of our flop discussion, we're going to put aside blockers and unblockers for the moment and just focus on incremental equity. Incremental equity refers to the properties of a hand that either increase its showdown strength or which make it more likely for the hand to hit a stronger holding on later streets, specifically front door and backdoor draws, overcards, and kickers. These are attributes that the solver will often use to differentiate strategies among various combos within the same hand class. In most circumstances, incremental equity will cause a combo within a class of hands that have incentives to check to instead bet, but in some circumstances, incremental equity will have the opposite effect, where it will cause a combo within a class of hands that have incentives to bet to instead check to realize equity. So with this framework in mind, if we isolate all of our underpairs, we see that there's a clear propensity for the solver to check more frequently when not holding a spade, and to bet with higher frequency, relatively speaking, when holding a spade, due to the additional drawing equity the flush draw provides. We should note, though, that the solver isn't simply betting 100% of its underpairs with a flush draw, and it isn't simply checking 100% of its underpairs without a flush draw, but rather it's mixing its strategies across all combos. However, this is one area where I personally intentionally deviate from the solver strategy because, frankly, this level of complexity is impossible for anyone to replicate. There are trillions of different situations in poker, and within each of those situations, each combo will be played with varying strategies based on a multitude of subtle factors that no human being can possibly emulate accurately. So instead of partaking in an exercise in futility and trying to memorize the exact frequencies used in these scenarios, I rely on the GTO check system and micro attributes in particular to approximate a balanced semi-merge strategy. So in this case, absent obvious exploitative considerations, I may decide to fire a bet with all of these middling combos that have a spade and to check those without a spade, and then for balance, I ensure that some of my flush draws without a pair will be checked. Similarly, on two-tone or rainbow boards, I'll often decide to bet or check a middling hand based on whether it has a backdoor flush draw, or blocks villain's backdoor flush draw, or has a front door or backdoor straight draw, all depending on how much betting I think I should be doing overall in light of the macro and meso analysis. Although this system is not perfect, the use of micro attributes as a tiebreaker in close spots does achieve, at least to some degree, the overall GTO goal of balance and range disguisal by using information that is unknown to the opponent, thereby making it very difficult to exploit. And in most situations, even if you guess wrong in terms of the effect of a micro attribute in a particular spot, the EV difference between betting and checking will often be close, meaning you will avoid making a huge error. Furthermore, this system of analysis helps simplify the game because instead of trying to balance your entire range, you can simply focus on your particular hand class, as a solver will, in most spots, mix its strategies within each class based largely on these micro attributes. And as a quick study tip, to ensure that I personally am not over or under aggressing, I practice and refine this strategy using Simple Poker's GTO trainer tool, and find that more often than not, utilizing this heuristic leads to results that will be relatively close to GTO frequencies, both overall and for specific hand classes.
And a little perhaps surprising to see Phil bet this one, but maybe not necessarily. But a second pair and the nut flush draw, maybe the one he can check back, but decide to bet it. I mean, Ivan can definitely call with some weaker hands, as can Ben.
Oh, man.
Oh dear. That's where Phil gets paid.
Look at that look. He's just thinking about he's just like trying to look not interested. And he is like, I have the nuts versus the wildest guy at the table.
So facing Phil's flop bet, Ben folds and Ivan calls, both of which are standard plays according to the solver. The turn is the 7 of spades, completing both Phil's and Ivan's flushes, and Phil barrels, this time with a 60% pot bet. So Phil likely has a range advantage here, as he should have a significantly greater percentage of spade kings and queens in his range compared to the tighter small blind range. However, we see that the solver is doing a lot of checking on this monotone turn, likely for the same reasons we mentioned on the flop. So how do we determine which flushes he should check and which flushes he should bet in this scenario? Well, again, we can focus on micro attributes to help guide our decision, namely kickers and blockers. In this case, if we isolate our flushes, we see that there's a pretty clear trend on this monotone board of the solver mainly checking with the weaker flushes and mainly betting with the stronger flushes, with the line of demarcation being around jack high. However, we see that the solver is at the same time checking a number of strong flushes as well. So why is this? Well, generally speaking, in GTO, there will often be a positive correlation between the amount of checking a range is doing overall and the amount of slow playing the hero should be doing with the top of his range. And this, of course, is designed to protect hero's checking line. So once we know that the overall range should be doing quite a bit of checking, we'll need to find some nuttish candidates to slow play. Here we see that although the solver is betting most offsuit nut flushes, it is checking a number of suited nut flushes because holding the additional spade acts as a blocker against the flushes in villain's range, making it less likely villain will be able to call a bet. Similarly, most of these combos with top pair and a flush are checking, even with the king high and queen high flush, because holding the ace blocks many of villain's non-flush combos that are strong enough to continue facing a bet. However, we see that Ivy's particular hand is betting nearly 100% of the time, split between a 30% and a 60% pot bet. In short, in a normal SPR situation, the default strategy with the nuts should always be to bet to grow the pot, and since Phil's holding is offsuit and therefore doesn't block additional weaker flushes in Ivan's range, and also since it doesn't contain an ace and therefore doesn't block Ivan's top pairs, there's really no compelling reason to slow play this hand, at least from a GTO perspective.
45 is the bet. Ivan, of course, will be going nowhere with the second nuts.
Wow, this is a dream scenario for Phil.
I mean, this is just a question of how much he bets is how much he's going to win, right?
He set up a pot-size river show.
Yeah.
Ivan calls with the second nut flush, and we see that the solver is not doing any raising here, since on this monotone board, most of Ivan's hands are either far ahead or far behind Phil's betting range.
And it's just...
And the board does pair, but that's still...
That shouldn't really change us, right? Because Phil's not betting a set or two pair on the turn that sizing, is he? He's checking those backs.
No,
so
and for Ivan's perspective, just thinking if Phil could think, you know, Ivan somehow could find a boat, but it doesn't matter. He's got the nut flush, and
he has
he knows he's getting called by queen of spade, jack of spade, and...
The river is the deuce of hearts, and Ivy decides to shove. And we see that even with the board pairing, the solver is still shoving with most of its remaining flushes, although it will begin to check back with the jack-high flush.
And Ivan saw this going differently in his head.
Yeah.
He saw a trap turn into a
Yeah, he just limped the
tough
queens.
situation.
Just flat the queens, pardon me, from the small. Makes the second nut flush.
You
And
gotta think, what hand is Phil bluffing in this scenario, though? To ship it like this, is he turning? Is he just got a random? Ivan does not appear to be a guy that is going to be folding the second nuts. I mean, and you can't blame him really in this spot. It's
he
just
can't, he can't fold this one. You gotta.
I don't know, man. You know. But yeah, it's just like what is Phil shelling off here, though? You know, is there maybe the board pair? Is there? You're right though. Like, is he doesn't bet a set or two pair?
No,
on
he
the
doesn't. He just checks those hands back. He's happy to see the river with
Ivan's
those.
probably like, he knows. Ivan's like, man, I'm a wild player. Is Phil really trying to bluff me here? You know, because Ivan knows he's perceived that way.
Right, of course. But I mean, Ivan just has so many, like, one pair hands, even some lower spades. They get this way, they can
Ivan
be comfortable
get
folding.
out of the way.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe he just thinks
I think he
he's not
can.
going to try and bluff me.
I think he can get away. Ivan has
I still think I like the call, but
look at this. That's a mock face. Fold.
wow.
Oh, Mr. Liao. Ivan Liao. Phil's got to feel sick. Oh my goodness, what a world-class fold there.
Wow.
Very
Where'd
nice.
you go, Jeff? I mean, that's
Good fold?
that's
Yes. You cannot bluff me.
So Ivan tanks before making a pretty big hero fold, kissing and then laying down the second nut flush. His play turns out to be correct, but according to the solver, he's losing a lot of EV from a GTO standpoint by choosing to fold pocket queens with the queen of spades. We don't know Ivan's thought process here, but he likely tried to find natural bluffs in Phil's range that would triple barrel, but wasn't able to come up with many combos. However, while this type of exercise of assessing villains' potential bluffs is useful and should impact how wide Hero is calling, if you're playing against an opponent that has a very balanced bluffing range, they should have some bluffs that are not intuitive. Right, on a board like this with 4 cards of the same suit, there will rarely be many natural bluffs available by the river, but from a GTO perspective, if villain has any value, he will almost certainly have bluffs as well. So if we take a look back at Phil's range, we see that there are some seemingly random bluffs thrown in at varying frequencies, including lower pairs, missed Broadway straight draws, and some total air that are leveraging Phil's overall range advantage. Accordingly, we see that in Ivan's shoes, although the solver is calling with 100% of its pocket queens, it does actually start to fold other queen high flushes that have the jack kicker, which blocks some of the bluffs in Phil's shoes. So that's the video for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay at home.